Hey guys! What's up? Alpha Lion Simba here, and welcome to part 6 of sentencing Disney villains for their crimes. As always, I am your judge, jury, and executioner. But first, let's summon our bailiff, prosecution lawyer, and counselor, Jiminy Cricket.
Thank you very much, Alpha. As always, I'm here to help you with the sentencing.
Thanks, Jiminy. And this time we're going to start covering the films that came out after Walt's death. And our first 3 ones are The Aristocats, Robin Hood, and The Rescuers. So, with no further ado, court is now officially in session.
Naturellement, The Aristocats is the first film in this week's docket. C'est magnifique, no? Excellent French there, Alpha. Thanks, Jiminy. Anywho, our first villain to stand trial is Edgar. As you all remember, Edgar's evil scheme was to steal Duchess's fortune. He executed this by drugging the cat's milk with sleeping pills and then planned to dump them into the wild. And then when that didn't work, he decided to ship them off to Timbuktu. That gets him the charges of kidnapping, and that, as well as his interactions with O'Malley during the climax, get him charged with animal cruelty as well. And don't even get me started on that motorcycle of his. He does not drive that safe at all. For example, he even accidentally almost drove it into the metro. So we can get him for reckless driving. With all that in mind, I shall sentence Edgar to 19 years in prison without parole.
Now, I'm sure some of you are wondering why I gave Edgar 19 years, even though I gave Cruella life, since she too was guilty of animal cruelty and reckless driving. Well, Jiminy, care to explain?
Well, sir, in spite of the nature of Edgar's crimes, he's not as evil as Cruella, since he never actively tried to kill Duchess or her kittens to get the fortune, and instead opted to abandon them. Not to mention, he ain't particularly bright. So, I think it only makes sense for him to just get 19 years.
I couldn't agree any more. Alright, now that that's settled, let's move on.
Alright, our next film in the docket is Robin Hood. Oodalali! It's time to sentence the bad guys from Sherwood Forest and the surrounding areas. Starting with Prince John's right-hand snake, Sir Hiss. Which will bring us to his first charge. Like you said, he was Prince John's right-hand snake, so that makes Hiss guilty of aiding and abetting. Plus, it was Prince John's idea to send King Richard off on the Crusades, and he had Sir Hiss be the one to hypnotize King Richard into doing so, which also makes Hiss guilty of treason. With all that in mind, we sentence Sir Hiss to 13 years in the slammer. And while we're at it, put him in a pair of cuffs that will prevent him from slithering out of his cell. Up next is Old Bushel Britches, the honorable, or shall I say, dishonorable, Sheriff of Nottingham. While the sheriff is one of Prince John's biggest helpers, which would get him a charge of aiding and abetting, we will be focusing more on some of his bigger charges. Throughout the film, he collects tax money for Prince John, which of course is political stuff, but still, he commits these crimes while doing so. He steals extra money from basically everyone in Nottingham. Like, he stole from Otto, the blacksmith, took the one coin that was meant to be the birthday present for Skippy the bunny, and he was even willing to steal from a blind beggar, even though it really was just Robin in disguise. And he was willing to steal from the church's poor box, too. So, that makes old Bushel Britches guilty of 4 counts of theft. Not to mention, let's bring up the way how he got Otto's money. By hitting him on his bad foot, because that extra money was hidden in his cast. So, we'll get him for assault and battery charges. Plus, he imprisons over half the villagers for not being able to pay the unjust taxes and arrests Friar Tuck for objecting, which will get Bushel Britches charged with wrongful imprisonment. And he actively dueled against Robin in the castle, which makes him guilty of attempted murder. With all that in mind, I must agree with Wicked Binge's latest video and sentence the Sheriff of Nottingham to life in prison without parole. Our final Robin Hood villain to stand trial for today is the phony King of England himself, Prince John. Now, Prince John may be a thumb-sucking mama's boy, but I'm not letting him off so easy. You know how we mentioned that Hiss hypnotized King Richard and sent him on the Crusades? Well, Prince John was the ringleader. So that means that PJ, too, is guilty of treason. Yup, he abuses his power to no end without even thinking about what would happen to the poor citizens, thus making him guilty of corruption and abuse of power. Not to mention, he taxes the citizens of Nottingham to near poverty. Many of the money was stolen by the sheriff. And PJ does not use this tax money to benefit the country, but rather for his own selfish interests, making him guilty of embezzlement. Not to mention, he tries numerous times in the film to kill Robin and even plans to have Friar Tuck hanged, an order that even Hiss was shocked by. And if you're going by the events of the deleted ending of the film, he also tried to kill Maid Marian and would have succeeded if not for the timely arrival of King Richard. Yep, all of which gets PJ guilty of multiple counts of attempted murder. Now, as for his sentence, well, His Majesty King Richard said that he did consider banishing them, but knew that doing so would upset their mother. Very true, which is why I sentenced Prince John to life in prison without parole.
I've got a dirty thumb.
Our final film in this week's docket is The Rescuers, starting with Madame Medusa. Now, she may not be as evil as her successor, Macleach, who we will get to, but she still has some heavy crimes underneath her belt, so to speak. Well, let's get the most obvious one settled first. She kidnaps Penny just for her own personal gain and benefit. Right off the bat, that's a charge of kidnapping. Yup. And she sends Penny down a treacherous cavern to try and retrieve the Devil's Eye Diamond, which could have easily gotten Penny hurt or killed. So that's a charge of child endangerment. Not to mention, she tried to shoot Bernard and Bianca when she saw them, and she didn't exactly treat Brutus and Nero any better, so we can get her for animal cruelty. Not to mention, she tried to make off with the diamond and threatened to shoot Penny and or Snoops if they followed, which gets her a charge of both death threats and attempted murder. With all that in mind, I sentence Madame Medusa to 50 years to life in prison without parole. And finally, it's time to sentence her sidekick, Mr. Snoops. Now, he may not be as evil as Medusa, but Snoops ain't getting off the hook. Since, of course, he is Madame Medusa's sidekick, that automatically makes him guilty of aiding and abetting. Yup, and as such, that also makes him guilty of kidnapping, since he was involved in Penny's kidnapping. But since he's not as evil as Madame Medusa, and honestly kind of stupid and bumbling, instead, like Sir Hiss, Snoops will be sentenced to 13 years in prison.
Well, that was it. Part 6 of sentencing Disney villains for their crimes. Thanks for watching. Hope you liked it. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And again, I'd like to thank Jiminy for his help.
My pleasure, Alpha. As always, I'm here to help, and I'll see you next week.
And stay tuned for next week's trials. But in the meantime, this session of court is now officially adjourned.